Wonder Egg Priority has been one of the best anime watching experiences I've had in a while, and there are many factors that contributed to it, from the lovable characters, the fantastic OST, the jaw-dropping animation, the interesting representation on suicide, and I can go on and on. So when I was coming up with the introduction for this video, I've been racking my brain over and over again on trying to create this elaborate explanation on how to describe how I feel when I watch this anime. But the one word that always comes to my mind whenever I try writing this video is passion. It's so simple, yet so fitting. As the audience, you can feel the love put into this anime within just the first episode. All thanks to the wonderful staff working on the anime. With the pre-production for this anime taking at least 2 years so they can build this great group of people to make sure the quality will sit at this certain level. What's even more amazing is that the starting staff for the whole project was somewhat small compared to an average anime production. An average anime production has around 20 key animators working on it. But with Wonder Egg Priority, the first 2 episodes there were only around 13 key animators. It wasn't until later on they were adding on more key animators to help keep the quality high. Another fascinating thing I learned about the production for this anime is that the episode director, the storyboarding, and the animation director were being cycled between all the original key animators. I feel like this is the first time I've seen an anime do this into production, and what I find really interesting about this is that doing something like this could have been a total train wreck. The cinematography could have been messed up, the composition for shots could have been random, the timing for certain scenes could have been screwed up. There's just so many points where the show could have been compromised because of this decision of doing the production the way it did. But yet, Wonder Egg Priority didn't have any of these problems happen. Instead, it created this really fascinating relationship between all of the staff, giving the whole project basically instant feedback on what could have been improved on or what kind of ideas could have been added to enhance our enjoyment, coming from the viewpoint as a key animator. I mean, what better advice would you want than coming from the people literally spending hours and hours drawing the anime? This also helps show the skills of all the key animators as being a director, a storyboarder, and an animation director. Because as the key animator, they could have had a really interesting idea on how to direct a certain scene when working on the anime, and when it's their turn to become the episode director, they now have the power to add in the ideas they had without any compromises. Now, if I didn't know about any of this, I wouldn't have noticed that this was being done. I would have just thought it was the same initial people that were working on it throughout all the episodes. I feel like most anime productions wouldn't have gotten the same results that Wonder Egg Priority did. So why was Cloverworks able to make this work? Well, like I've been saying from the very beginning of the video, everybody working on this anime was so passionate in creating this, and they wanted to keep the quality as high as possible. However, this came at a slight cost. Episode 8 unfortunately had to become a recap episode, and then episode 11 and 12 were being delayed a couple hours. This was the result from some scheduling/production issues and not being able to get all the material ready to send out. What's amazing though is that you don't even notice a drop in quality in the episodes before the recap. Now, for the people who dropped the show after the recap episode, I have something very special I want to say to you. What the fuck is wrong with you, you ignorant, spoiled brat? Don't complain about the recap episode when you don't even know the whole story behind why. Listen, I was upset about the delay as much as the next person. But the official Wonder Egg Priority Twitter profile made an announcement saying that because of the unexpected scheduling issues, they were going to delay the episode, and I'm pretty sure they apologized for that. I respect this so much, because I feel like many studios would have just rushed through everything to get the episode done in time. But no, they didn't want the quality of the anime to go down in any way. They set the bar at a certain level, and they're keeping it there no matter what. This once again shows the passion the staff has for this anime. Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg for the amount of passion you see in this anime, and hands down, the biggest contributor is the incredible writing done by Nojima Shinji. For anyone who doesn't know this man, it's totally fine that you don't, because this is the first time he has ever written for an anime. Let me give a brief background about Nojima to show you how he's the perfect fit to be the writer for Wonder Egg Priority. During the 90s, Nojima was the writer for many J-dramas containing dark topics such as incest, sexual assault, and suicide. One of his most well-known works during that time was Koukou Kyoshiki. The show incorporated themes of LGBT+, and later on in his career he started to incorporate LGBT+ themes into his writings more and more often. Then in 2008 he released the novel Sumusunumumuriku no Koibito, and it talked about the topics of being transgender. The novel was extremely well received and it even got a manga. From this, do you now see why I think he's the perfect writer for Wonder Egg Priority? With that now out of the way, let's talk about his writing in Wonder Egg Priority. You can definitely see his past experience of writing these darker themes being translated very well in this anime. Let's take for example all the Wonder Killers. Ai, Neru, Rika, and Momoe all combat a different type of trauma that is related to the four main girls. With Ai, the Wonder Killers are centered around bullying. With Neru, the Wonder Killers are centered around the desire of dying before they lose what is quote-unquote valuable to them. With Rika, the Wonder Killers are centered around the influence of others to be tempted by death. And finally, with Momoe, the Wonder Killers are centered around sexual assault and gender identity. The fact that Nojima was able to incorporate so many of these darker themes and portray them so well without being disrespectful to anyone who has experienced any of these topics, it is extremely impressive. Another thing that really sets this anime apart from most other animes is that almost everything shown to us has some sort of deeper meaning to it. This is done through all the little touches they add and the polish they have in the anime. From the setting to the dreamscape world, the signature catchphrase of each girl, the weapons they wield, and even the pomander. They all have a reason behind why they were chosen for this specific character, and I will get back to these in a bit. The final thing I want to talk about with Nojima's writing is that you can interpret everything in many different ways. And what makes this so genius is that even if you interpret it differently to someone else, it doesn't affect the plotline and your enjoyment of the show. In fact, it probably enhances it by causing tons of discussions between the audience. Because of that, I want to have the rest of this video by breaking down my interpretations on each of the four girls, some of my favorite moments, and the small details in the anime. Who knows, I may show you guys something that you may have missed. So let's start this off and talk about everyone's favorite sunflower. Ai, without a doubt, has grown so much as a person throughout the anime. At first, she was this very reserved character, but later on, she becomes one of the most friendly characters out of the four girls. Obviously, the catalyst for this change was the encounter of the Wonder Eggs. It made her realize that if she stays the way she is, she would never have the strength or the courage to help anyone, not even herself. With episode 6, it showed how far she's come. With Ai deciding that she wants to go back to school, it was the very first step for her to face all the trauma she has experienced in the past and finally combat it. I also love at the end of the scene, Ai brushes aside the hair covering her blue eye to fully show her self-confidence. Now, I heard from a couple people that it felt a bit too sudden and a bit too random for her to choose that time to do that. While I can understand that because it was a bit jarring, especially when I first watched it, but after watching the episode a couple more times and reflecting on it, I have a pretty good explanation to it now. First of all, I didn't know that she brought back the prayer beads into the real world. It wasn't until her mother told her that there was something in her pocket. I probably saw this as a sign and thought maybe I can use this in the real world to uncover something. That's why she went to the school to check if there was something around Sawaki or around the school. And since she saw nothing, she decided to go back to school. Another interpretation of this is that the prayer beads were like a lucky charm to Ai, and it just gave her the final boost of confidence to go back to school. The final few things I want to talk about Ai are the smaller details I listed off earlier in the video. So let's first talk about the setting of the dreamscape world. The reasoning behind it being a school is fairly obvious, of it representing the era she felt the most grief in. But it also creates this really elegant juxtapositions where she's becoming stronger in an environment where she felt the weakest in, and that applies to all the other girls as well. With the signature line being "I'm mad now," once again it's another expression of Ai building up the confidence and coming out of her shell. Then with her weapon being the full color pen, it's a nice little nod to her heterochromia eyes, and her pomander being a chameleon is also another example representing that. With that, we can now move on to Neru. Neru by far has the most interesting backstory, and we really need to dissect her backstory to really understand what she's going through internally. Starting at the very beginning, we learn that Neru and her sister were born by artificial insemination from 2 other members of PLEEG. Later on in her life, we learn that her sister stabbed Neru in the back and then jumped off a bridge. Lastly, we learn that her only companion put herself in a vegetative state from one of her own experiments, leaving Neru totally alone now. From all of this, we can see that probably a big reason Neru acts on only logical thinking is because she never really had a proper human connection in her whole life. This made her very monotone, straight-faced, and seemed quite emotionless. However, in episode 9, it was the first time we've seen Neru be so emotional, and we finally get to see a glimpse of what Neru truly feels about everything that has happened to her. This was a huge breakthrough. It showed us that Neru, for the entire anime, she was in grief for both Kotobuki and her sister just leaving her. But the big question here is, why did Neru's sister do what she did? My best guess, based off of all the Wonder Killers Neru has faced off, it has something to do with the fact that Neru's sister thought that there was no worth in continuing their life. Maybe because she realized that sooner or later, they would have just been aimlessly living through life all alone, and that it would have been better to just die now before something like that happens. This type of thinking has been displayed so amazingly well with all the examples we've seen from Neru's battles. As much as this mindset is naive, you can understand their thought processes for their reasons, and doing something like this is quite difficult. Getting to the smaller details about Neru, they're all pretty easy to understand, just like Eyes. With the setting of the dreamscape world, it's the bridge where her sister committed suicide. Then everything else is related to Neru's intelligence, from her signature line being "I'm going to blow your mind," her weapon being a compass, and her pomander being a snake. Now, getting to Rika, she is my favorite character. I think it's because there was a lot to unpack about her, and for me personally, I think she's the best written character. The moment I first saw Rika get introduced in episode 3, I instantly could tell that Rika was putting up a facade and was really acting it up to hide something. Later in the episode, we get a small look into the side of her that she's ashamed of. Seeing these cuts on her arms, anyone can instantly tell that Rika is severely struggling with something in her life. And the line that she told herself, "I won't cut myself anymore, I promise," it hits deep, because you know she's lying. This character was written so well, by first causing the audience to have this knee-jerk reaction of, "I don't like this character." The writing was doing its job properly. Then slowly peeling back the layers and showing the underlying reasons for why that is, it adds complexity to the character. A lot of the times in media when they have a character like Rika, they have them acting super depressed, but there is so much of a broader spectrum on how someone like that would act in public. With Rika, she acts like an idol. This is a really nice callback to when she was one. Now getting farther into the anime, episode 7 is by far the best episode for Rika. We learn so much more about her personal life, finally getting the details that help explain everything. The line Rika says about how a pretty girl doesn't need to carry a wallet, she says this so often because it's the only thing she can cling on to that is about her father. Then there's a scene where she shows everyone the possible candidates of men that could be her father. Rika keeps this upbeat attitude while saying such truly sad lines. It hurts so much to watch because Rika shouldn't have to deal with this, but she should also be showing her weaker side to everyone else now. All these scenes are amazing. However, my favorite scene for episode 7 is such a throwaway scene, but to me it tells so much with such a simple action. The scene I'm talking about is when Rika is meeting up with everyone else, and when she's saying hi to Neru, she slaps Neru on her back. This very simple scene tells so much about Rika's personality and her relationship with Neru. The only reason that Rika did this was because she knew about the scars Neru had from a previous episode. Things like this show the attention to details the staff have when making this anime. Okay, with all that now done, let's get to the final smaller details I want to talk about. First, starting off with the setting of the dreamscape world is this giant flower field, which is really weird because for Rika, I would have thought it would have been a stage or maybe something like her mom's bar. However, thinking more about it, Rika only learned about Chiami's death through another fan, and because of that, she probably couldn't imagine a certain location related to her death. resulting in having the dreamscape world being this giant flower field. Then for her signature line being "I'll knock you off your feet with a shot to the heart," it's another reference to when she was an idol. As for her weapon, it looks like box cutters relating to her self-harm. Finally, for Palmender being a turtle, I view it as representing Rika sheltering herself off and not showing people the other sides of her. Okay, lastly but definitely not least, let's talk about Momoe. She was a really fascinating character to break down. When we were first introduced to Momoe, I thought Momoe was just a girl that had more masculine features and she just wanted to be accepted as a girl even though she didn't conform to the traditional standards. However, after watching more and more scenes with her, my perception of her started to shift. And I'm starting to think that Momoe may actually be a transgender who transitioned fairly early in her life. If this is the case, then that definitely makes her one of the most progressive characters I've seen in a while. So, which scenes made me change my perspective of Momoe? I think the first scene was in episode 10. There was this scene where Momoe's shirt was ripped open, and when we look at the color of her bra, it's the colors of the trans flag. This scene made me re-evaluate everything that came before, and it changed the meaning behind them. For example, the scene where she cries out to Ai and asks, "What do I look like to you?" At first I thought Momoe meant this was, "Do I look like a boy to you?" But then after my shift in perspective, I feel like what Momoe actually meant was, "What gender do you see me as?" These types of subtleties are within the anime quite often, and that just makes me really happy. Moving on from that, they also did a great job with displaying the backstory for Haruka. In a flashback, we see Haruka confess to Momoe and tell her that she can touch her. Then we see Momoe looks terrified. From this, we can piece together that Momoe rejected Haruka, and because of that, she probably committed suicide. With that, we can now get to the smaller details related to Momoe. For the dreamscape world, we can probably guess that Haruka committed suicide in a train station. But it could also have a relation to the struggle she's had with people saying she doesn't belong in the women's only trains. As for her signature line being "Get lost," it's an embodiment of what she wants to say to anyone who questions her gender. Then for her weapon being an umbrella, possibly it's a relation for her being trans, seeing as an umbrella changes from closed off then to opening up. Lastly, for a Palmender being a crocodile, they have been known to have no sex chromosomes, and their gender depends on the temperature of incubation. Again, another thing relating to Momoe's gender identity. From everything I just said, can you not see all the love and passion put into this anime? There is so much to analyze, and honestly, I still have a ton of points I could have talked about, but this video doesn't need to be any longer. Now, you could totally disagree with all the points I made in this entire video, and that's totally fine. But I know there are other people out there that probably came up with the same interpretations like me, or maybe I showed some of you guys something you totally didn't notice. That is the beauty of an anime like this, it causes discussion. 100% I'm keeping my eyes out for anything Nojima Shinji and Wakabayashi Shin make in the future, because if they even put in half of the amount of passion that was in Wonder Egg Priority, then it's going to be amazing.